Well, howdy, folks, and welcome back to the farm. Welcome to Meet the Aliens, Volume 6. Today we're gonna catch up on a couple of things. As you all know, I've tried to make myself your one-stop shop for all things alien. So what's been going on with our little creepy friends as of late? There's some weird stuff going on that indicates a major rift inside the program. So we clearly have one faction that supports some sort of limited disclosure this year or maybe next year. Then you've got the other side who, for reasons we'll investigate, have turned straight up deadly. We've got people disappearing. We have a movie coming out in July. Not another documentary with tense interviews with government officials who claim to have some knowledge about the program. This is an actual fictional Hollywood movie made by none other than Steven Spielberg himself. And it's coming out in July of this year. It would be interesting if it came out a year later, in July of 2027. That would be the 80th anniversary of the UFO crash outside of Roswell, New Mexico in 1947. So what's so special about this movie? What does a Spielberg alien movie have to do with real life? Well, some people are claiming that it's a kind of predictive programming. In other words, it's to prepare the public's imagination for what's coming next year. I think they're starting a little bit late. And if that is the plan, I think that whoever came up with this plan vastly overestimates the power that Hollywood has over our culture right now. And so in this movie, strangely enough, there's basically an alien invasion, but to some extent, the aliens are already here. Uh-oh. And it turns out that it appears that part of the plot of this movie is that some people, quote-unquote people, that we think are human are actually not. They're some sort of hybrid or sleeper agent ready to spring into action whenever the invasion is a go. Now, this is strange because this is not Steven Spielberg's first foray into the world of aliens, of course. He completely fictionalized the plot of E.T., the extraterrestrial. Although, there's some of the trappings of the program. You've got the secret law enforcement people that never really identify themselves, and they have all this special equipment. And clearly, they're tracking alien activity on Earth. Now, in 1978, before E.T., Steven Spielberg created Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And as we've talked about before in the Meet the Aliens series, these close encounter categories were developed by the Air Force, no less, in the 1950s during Project Blue Book. And a close encounter of the first kind is the most common kind, and that's just a light in the sky or some sort of object zipping through the sky. Then we have close encounters of the second kind. That's where you get some detailed information about the actual vehicle. You get some sort of radar data or other visual indication of its interaction with the environment. In other words, does it land? Did it burn trees as it passed over? Did anyone have to go to the hospital for treatment of radiation burns, which happened in Southeast Texas in the 80s? Ufologists generally think that that incident was caused by the test of a human reconstruction that was the result of humans working on their reverse engineering of alien or NHI technology. And recall that NHI stands for non-human intelligence, which is the preferred government term for our alien friends. That phrase cropped up dozens of times in the 2024 Mass Appropriations Bill, and there were members of Congress who were attempting to insert language that would require people who knew about the reverse engineering programs to cough up some information to Congress. Well, that didn't really work. that was watered down into nothing before the actual bill was signed. And so, thanks to people like Lou Elizondo or David Grush, we know that there is some faction of the program that wants to disclose at least some things to the public. But then we have another faction that will do anything, literally anything, to prevent disclosure. And we'll talk about what reasons they have for such an extreme position. And it appears that some of the pro-disclosure people have been in touch with our current president. And as many of you may have seen, the president did direct the Department of Defense and the intelligence community to review classified materials and release documents to the public related to the program, meaning the reverse engineering of UFOs and our government's contact with NHI factions in the deep underground military bases, particularly in the American Southwest and at facilities like Diego Garcia in the Indian Ocean, or Pine Gap in Western Australia. And so it turns out that right around the time of the president's direction to release UFO materials, people started disappearing. And no doubt through the activity of the anti-disclosure faction of the program. Look up an Air Force officer named McCasland. I doubt you'll ever hear about him on CNN or Fox, but he was closely associated with aerospace engineering and the program, and he just decided to go on a walk one day from his house and was never seen again. Then also recently, a scientist who was working on aerospace engineering and appears to have some connection to the program, she decided to go hiking one day and was never seen again. Then there were two other researchers, one of whom was in California, and a stranger knocked on their door, came in their house, and shot them dead. So that's 4 people gone in just the last couple of months. So that's interesting. Now, before I move on to the big subjects surrounding 2027, let me mention one more thing about 3i Atlas. It did just what I said it would do. It's on its way out of the solar system. But, like I said, there have been multiple blackouts and a weird lack of overall information about 3i Atlas. And then you have the non-government observers who are able to get data and images of 3i Atlas. They found very, very strange activity going on the surface of this thing. And our old friend Avi Loeb published another paper claiming that 3i Atlas has 3 jets that eject material, and these jets are spaced exactly 120 degrees from each other, and that they fire in a very specific pattern that keeps 3i Atlas oriented toward the sun at a particular angle. Now, what does that mean? Well, we don't know. So 3i Atlas is regarded by some people as sort of a precursor probe, an initial scouting of our solar system for, once again, what comes next. Now, what is coming next? Well, I mean, it's weird to say out loud. It sounds crazy. Probably because it is. But you do have a lot of people in the know, supposedly, talking about alien invasion in 2027. But you might be thinking, I thought they were already here. Vincent, didn't you say that they basically kind of already did invade by sort of moving in before we had any capacity to detect them, let alone eject them from the Earth? And now one of the human factions on the surface developed nuclear weapons. Then all of a sudden they started monitoring, and they ended up making a deal with the United States in 1954. Look up the Greada Treaty, Greada, that started the human cooperation with NHI on Earth. And by extension, the Deep State was formed. I guess you could say the Deep State grew around the kernel of 12 people, Dwight D. Eisenhower and 11 others that he appointed, one of whom was Vannevar Bush. Another was James Forrestal, who sadly lost his mind after a disagreement with members of the deep state, and he jumped out of a window and died by suicide. Poor guy. Who knew that he had struggled with depression his whole life? James Forrestal was apparently a pilot during World War I and had served with distinction all through World War II. So, of course, people like that are a little flaky. You never know when they're going to lose it. So, there's nothing weird about that. The Majestic 12, that's what they were called. And the Majestic 12 were basically the extra-governmental authority of humans that regulated our interaction with NHI. And the problem started in the 2010s when the last surviving member of the original Majestic 12 died. And over the years, the program had become so fragmented and hidden that the Majestic 12 didn't have much control over it anyway. And they were not replaced, apparently, as they died. So the program is essentially rudderless and leaderless as of the late 2000s, really. What remained of the program split into two factions in the wake of the dissolution of the Majestic 12, and their major disagreement is what to do about 2027. Because apparently both of them think that at least part of the game is going to be over in 2027 for some reason. And we'll talk about some of the theories about what's supposed to happen in 2027. But one group appears to say no disclosure ever under any circumstances because it could destroy humanity. Okay. And then the other faction says, no, we have to prepare the public for the existential crisis that the events of 2027 might cause, and that to preserve our civilization as much as possible, this information has to get out. So they say. Okay, so what are some of the theories about 2027? Well, let's start with one that I find particularly unlikely. And that has to do with the Earth's magnetic field. We know for a fact that the Earth's magnetic field does flip from time to time. I think it's an approximately 11,000 year cycle where the North Pole is sort of magnetically north, but over time the field weakens and then gets sort of chaotic and then realigns the other way, where magnetic north is really what used to be the South Pole in terms of magnetism. Poles reverse. So, magnetic compasses would all have to be redesigned. But the real problem really just lies with the interim period where we have a weak or chaotic magnetic field that doesn't reliably channel all of the sun's charged particles into the poles like it does now. Let's say a charged particle is headed directly for Texas. It's going to hit me right on the head when I walk out the door today. Well, when it hits the Earth's magnetic field, it is deflected. Since Texas is north of the equator, it would most likely be deflected north, and then it would be attracted to the magnetic North Pole, and as it cascades through the atmosphere down toward the pole, it ionizes the air molecules that it passes by and causes what we refer to as the aurora borealis. We are close to the 11,000 year deadline for the poles to reverse, But when you're talking about something this fuzzy and something that occurs in terms of geologic time, then the odds that the magnetic field will just sort of disappear to almost nothing next year is just a little unlikely, I think. Plus, if the magnetic field became extremely weak and charged particles from the sun and also cosmic rays from outside the solar system would rain down on the Earth with nothing stopping them. And that could cause a problem for electronics, but also especially for human skin. The cancer rates could go up. But that is not extreme or likely or decisive or destructive enough to justify the behavior of some of the people who are supposedly in the know about what's going to happen. Another big theory, which is slightly more likely, I think, is that the disks, the little gray guys, and the orbs that people see come from under the ocean. They are 3D printed in these weird bases that are 2 kilometers in diameter and sit on the bottom of the ocean in certain locations, but they can move if they want to. And so, according to some leakers, these devices, these UFO factories, are guided by AIs, and they landed on Earth 4,000 years ago, and their goal was to direct human evolution and prevent the destruction of life on Earth. Let me go ahead and say that they did a terrible job. Not only are we staring down the barrel of nuclear war still, but humans are not very well adapted to the life that we're supposed to be living now. But anyway, the other purpose of this system was also to defend the planet from interference from other NHI. But according to some leakers, this system is on its way out. This system is breaking down. It's running out of something. I don't know. Fuel? Battery power? The will to live? I don't know. But he is saying that they had to scale up their production of devices for their monitoring of nuclear weapons and our military activity in general, and then also continually messing with our genetics. And apparently our use of nuclear weapons in 1945 triggered a massive scale-up of this monitoring operation. And it apparently put a strain on this defense system, so much so that it will cease operations in 2027. Now, one bit of evidence, if you can call it that the leaker points to show that this system is sort of on its last legs or running down, is the occurrence of jellyfish UFOs. And I'm sure some of you have heard of this. There's military footage out of Mosul in Iraq and other places in the world where people see these strange floating things that, if it weren't for their straight line travel against the wind and their right angle turns and their general speed, and also, in some cases, their bizarre partial invisibility, all these factors make them unlikely to be some sort of weird, clever balloon or kite or something. And so the jellyfish UFOs have not been seen in the past. So maybe they are some sort of indicator that something is changing. Now let's talk about another theory. And multiple people have talked about this one. And the first person to talk about this, publicly at least, was a guy named Gary McKinnon. And Gary McKinnon, in 2001, hacked into a classified military computer system and retrieved some files that talked about a military program called Solar Warden. And that's SOLARWARDEN. Solar Warden. Uh-oh. So, a warden is the chief administrator of a prison. Now, I'm saving the prison planet theory for last, but this Gary McKinnon guy and his supposed documents is not the only person to talk about the Solar Warden program. It's also mentioned by Haim Eshed, a former Israeli government official who, after his retirement in the 2010s, wrote a book alleging that the United States and other countries had had some contact and ongoing cooperation with NHI factions on Earth, and on the Moon and on Mars, according to Haim Eshed. Haim Eshed says that the Solar Warden program is actually designed to protect the Earth from less friendly alien factions. And also, there is a restriction, apparently, on human space travel, because we're kind of dangerous. And there is apparently some sort of galactic federation, some sort of governing body made up of the leadership of various NHI factions who monitor dangerous species, and also when a certain species reaches a particular level of development, then they will reveal themselves to that species, and they can become part of the larger community of living things in the galaxy. We apparently have not reached that level yet. And some people say that if a species gets to a certain point, and it looks like their situation is hopeless, and it looks like they might just destroy themselves or use up all the resources on the planet, or start a nuclear war, that species is sort of reset, and the NHI start over. I don't know why they would do this kind of research. Maybe Earth is just a place where they simulate the older, original activities that created life in the universe. They might be so far ahead of us that Earth is some sort of quaint place that time forgot, where these dangerous but clever apes live. So, according to this theory, the ending of the operation of the underwater bases leaves the Earth exposed to interference or conquest by other NHI factions who had been deterred by the presence of the planetary defense system. And this would explain why the deep state chose to murder dozens of people and misappropriate $2 trillion over the last few decades to develop weapons that could counter an NHI invasion. Apparently, if you want to fight a war at their level, you have to have people with powerful psionic abilities, you have to have fighting vehicles that use electrogravitic propulsion, and you have to have certain kinds of laser technology. And supposedly, that's what we've done. And so, the whole point of the program was to be ready for 2027. Either for an invasion from another NHI group that we'll have to repel, or maybe to fight against a reset that the NHI that have been here all along decide to execute on the Earth. And I think it's interesting that what if these resets follow the sun's 11,000-year cycle? But that's just a weird hypothesis. And speaking of weird hypotheses, this one doesn't have a ready explanation for what's so important about 2027, but it does give a very bizarre and vivid image of what is really going on in the universe. The real program. The stuff that only a few humans have been allowed to see a glimpse of. And, of course, I'm talking about the reptilians. Now, the reptilians don't abduct people. They do consume people in some way, but the people are brought to them. They don't go out and get them. So you will not find a reptilian lurking in your backyard waiting to eat you. You will not be abducted by reptilians. Now, abductions by other humans could lead to your presence in front of a reptilian. Maybe even our little gray friends. Because remember, in some theories in ufology, the grays are just sort of genetic slop that gets 3D printed, and yeah, they have a lot of medical knowledge, and they seem really smart, and we can interact with them, but they're just sort of temporary biological avionics. That's one way one leaker described them. He said that they're printed right along with the ship. And that's why they die when you take them away from the ship for extended periods, which we covered in earlier volumes of this series. Biological avionics. That's weird. Now, why would the reptilians get involved in human trafficking? Well, there's one idea related to this theory that the reptilians did have complete free reign on Earth very early in human history, before the planetary defense system arrived. And the reptilians are not shy about wanting sacrifice. And the ugliest part of this theory is that what they want with the sacrifice is the conscious experience of the terror of the situation. Basically, the reptilians get some sort of boost or enjoyment or nutrition or power from negative human emotions. That basically the reptilians feed on human suffering. And this energy source, this kind of psychic food that we're talking about here, is sometimes called loosh, Loosh. And so the idea is that the reptilians want or need loosh, and early humans were a great source of that. And they came to humans in various forms and demanded sacrifice. And that's why we have all the bizarre ancient religions that we have that involved so much cruelty for no real reason. Well, we were being influenced by the reptilians. And then a few thousand years ago, the reptilian program had to go underground, literally, and their presence here is limited. Perhaps limited to Antarctica. There's your reptilian theory. Oh, I forgot to add, there's a base on the moon that projects some sort of energy field that either keeps souls trapped on Earth or absorbs them as people die on Earth. And that's sort of the source of reincarnation. And now we're getting into the prison planet theory. This is similar to the big secret in Scientology that the Earth was a dumping ground for the spirits or the psionic identities of evil beings from all over the galaxy or the universe. And so according to this idea, Buddha was right. Earth is hell. And the idea is that you have to develop yourself so that you can escape the eternal cycle of birth and death. And of course, there's an idea in the planetary defense system theory that the benevolent religious leaders that we have were influenced, directed, created by NHI, the good faction of NHI, and of course, they claim that Jesus was one of these people, and that was the source of his revolutionary ideas and his abilities. But, how on earth could you know that? That's a pretty bold claim. And then the idea is that Buddha also was influenced. Now, as I just said, I don't think Jesus was an alien or a hybrid or was guided by aliens. Jesus was apparently known to go out into the wilderness to be alone and to fast and pray. And of course, NHI love it when people are off by themselves. And then Buddha, famously, was born a wealthy, privileged, pampered prince of a kingdom in India. And he gave up his power and his belongings, and he went off into the woods to be by himself and to fast and to meditate. And he had visions, and apparently these beings visited him and started his mission. Well, that's kind of weird. But anyway, long story short, your soul is actually the soul of some sort of horrible criminal from another planet that was dumped here to be born and to die in this painful, primitive place forever. That's a happy thought. And this is just about where ufology, or the study of UFOs, goes off the deep end. But here's the strange thing. There are some people who want to take it even farther. We know that some people in the program are absolutely determined to prevent disclosure, not just because they're concerned about secret technologies being exposed to our enemies or prosecutions for crimes they've committed to support the program, or the misallocation of trillions of dollars in funding. No, they're not just concerned with that. They seem to be convinced that the UFO phenomenon is, quote-unquote, demonic. And that the NHI themselves are actually demons. And this explains how they're able to manipulate consciousness and how they sometimes do things that indicate some sort of immaterial abilities, like passing through walls, that sort of thing. It also explains why they are so deceptive about what they are or where they come from. And we've covered that in previous episodes of Meet the Aliens. And so I can't say that this is just crazy talk, especially because if this is true, if there is a faction of the deep state that believes that these things are demons, well then, I don't know. Who am I to deny that? I don't have the amount of information that they have. And if even 1% of this stuff about the reptilians turns out to be true, they sure do fit some of the definitions of a demon. And so we know for a fact that some government officials believe this. Our current Vice President, J.D. Vance, expressed an idea that this phenomenon might be demonic. And then David Grush and Lou Elizondo, who have had extensive connections with people all across the program, they have both talked about this faction within the deep state, and they say that this faction is working very hard to prevent disclosure because they believe that a widespread public belief and acknowledgement of the existence of UFOs or these NHI would bring about the end of the world. So this theory has a definite religious overtone, and in particular, a Christian overtone. It appears that this faction within the deep state views the war with Iran as something that could escalate and bring about some of the events in the Revelation to John. So to sum up their position, they think that these so-called aliens are all busy with their agendas and very concerned because, basically, Jesus is coming back in 2027. There's also an idea that the Earth is some kind of simulation. And if the humans on Earth ever figure out that they are being monitored, and all of our suffering and our civilizational churn of the rise and fall of one power after another, and all the misery and the suffering caused by that, is all just for their benefit in some way. There was an old South Park episode that covered this idea, and it turns out that Eric Cartman was being abducted by aliens, and Eric Cartman discovers that the Earth is a reality TV show. There is a galactic federation that produces reality TV shows that are super popular all over the galaxy, and Earth has been a hit for billions of years now. And so, once the humans figure out that they're being watched, similar to The Truman Show, well, then the show's not going to be good anymore. The aliens that control all media in the galaxy, the Jewsians, they decide to cancel Earth, and so they send machinery to Earth to destroy it. And Eric Cartman and his friends are able to save the world by going to planet Jewsia and basically blackmailing one of the Jewsians by showing him that they had photographs of him doing really unseemly things at a party. And they were able to convince him to let Earth continue for a few more seasons. So, is that what's going on? Are we stuck in a Truman Show scenario? So which one of these theories do I actually believe? Well, none of them. I think this stuff is 85% baloney. The Solar Warden program, in particular, stands out to me as possible disinformation. One of the odd things that Gary McKinnon uncovered was a list of names that were described as non-terrestrial officers. Non-terrestrial. So, not extraterrestrial, meaning they don't come from another planet, but non-terrestrial, meaning they do their duties off the Earth. They do not serve on the Earth. Now, Haim Eshed says that these non-terrestrial officers sometimes go to the moon or even Mars using electrogravitic technology. And if this stuff has the capabilities that we seem to see, that NASA has published information about, then they could get to Mars pretty quickly. It wouldn't take 9 months. So, do we have underground bases on the moon? I don't know. Do we have underground bases on Mars? Seems unlikely. We do know that there are deep underground military bases, otherwise known as DUMBs. We do know that they exist all over the world, particularly under Dulce, New Mexico, under Los Alamos, New Mexico, under the Denver airport. Those are 3 that we know of inside the United States. Apparently there are plenty on the eastern seaboard, including one in New Jersey, which may have been one of the reasons why there was that swarm of drones in New Jersey, because something may have been going on in that particular base. And the Aurora program, basically electrogravitic propulsion being used by the United States Air Force, that's pretty much an open secret. They've been testing that stuff in Utah for a while now. And no doubt they had some involvement in our attacks on Iran or even Venezuela, because these things can outrun anything else built by humans. And someone piloting one of these things would have no fear of something like a MiG or an F-16. I want everyone to continue to notice how one random person goes missing in Panama or Thailand, and they're all over the news, like this Guthrie lady. Now, I hope they find her. I feel terrible for her family. But I also feel terrible for the families of the people who are disappearing, who are associated with the program. But that's never going to be reported in the news. And so, since we know that there is a determined, concerted, anti-disclosure effort, then what's the deal with Spielberg's movie? There's 3 ways to look at this movie. One is that it has nothing to do with reality, it's pure entertainment, and Steven Spielberg just wants to put his name out there and create something fun and make some money, hopefully. Although, these days with Hollywood, that's unlikely. Then there's the second way of looking at it, which is that it's predictive programming. That Spielberg has fallen into the clutches of the deep state, and his particular handler is encouraging him to make this film and is giving him specific plot points that should be in the film to help prepare the public for the strange events of 2027. I'm not sure about that. Then there's the third way of looking at the movie, which is the one I believe. Spielberg really believes in this UFO stuff, and he's been kind of following it. And he wants to make a movie that involves some of the weird scenarios and themes that he has been reading about that supposedly relate to real life in the near future. And I believe this because Spielberg's already done it before. While E.T. was entirely fictional, Close Encounters of the Third Kind was heavily researched. And, in fact, Spielberg received a long letter from NASA while he was making the movie, asking him to remove certain elements of the movie to avoid public panic. That's weird. So, I guess, to sum up what I'm trying to say, I don't think Spielberg is going to do the bidding of the deep state like that. He's always had an independent interest and a sense of certainty about the presence of UFOs and NHI on Earth. So I think the movie is coming from a genuine place. But I gotta say, alien invasion is not on my 2027 bingo card. Perhaps some dump of information that causes a huge scandal. Maybe some proof that NHI are living on Earth. I'm not sure what form that proof could take. The public trust in our leaders and institutions is at an all-time low, I think. And I think you can prove that objectively with surveys. So some announcement by some talking head behind a podium is not going to settle the issue. It's not going to move the needle, as they say. And so, there's our NHI update for the time being. I still think the major event in 2027 is going to be some sort of economic devastation and perhaps expanded military conflicts. But I think 2027 will be the year of AI. I think that's what it's going to be remembered for in the future. So those are some of the major developments in ufology and in the world of NHI. Next week, we're going back to Stanley Kubrick for our next volume on why Stanley Kubrick. Last week, we finished talking about A Clockwork Orange and Barry Lyndon. And looking at my notes, I'm going to have to do 2 complete volumes on just The Shining. There is so much to talk about with The Shining. My favorite part of this was the big beef between Stephen King and Stanley Kubrick. But we'll talk about that next week. And so until then, talk to you later.